Let's break down what it costs to live in Colorado Springs in 2025. Is it still worth the move, or has the boom gone too far?
And later in the video, we're going to be comparing Colorado Springs directly with other major cities from LA and the Bay Area to St. Louis and a couple of East Coast cities as well, so that you can see how far your dollars really go when you come here.
Okay, let's start off with housing, because this is a 10-year story. We're going to talk about what caused the boom and whether or not you should buy, but we'd be remiss if we didn't start off with stats, because we really need to understand how we got to where we are today. So, starting back in 2015, our housing prices, our median sale price in the first quarter was roughly $245,000. In 2020, our quarter one median sales price looked like roughly $340,000. And then all of a sudden, 2022, big jump. That's the peak of the housing market. We were all the way up to $495,000. Outrageous. And then here in 2025, pulling the numbers from April, we're roughly about a $490,000 to $495,000 median sale price. So we've been a little bit flat over the last 3 years, and we'll talk about why that is too. Why does all that matter? Well, that's really where you're going to feel the pinch in our cost of living. Housing prices have nearly doubled. Well, actually, they've more than doubled over the last 10 years. It's been a 117% jump in housing prices. Why did this rocket ride happen in the first place? Well, we've had a huge population surge. Colorado Springs has grown almost 70% since the 90s. That's insane and unheard of. We've also had huge military and aerospace expansion, with Space Force headquarters staying here, 5 military installations already in the city, new DoD contracts every day, the expansion of companies like Lockheed Martin, Oracle, all your big players in that military defense space has been a big contributor to people with remote jobs moving to Colorado Springs and maintaining their higher pay. We also have a severe supply gap. With everything that happened in 2010, just like the rest of the country, we kind of quit building homes as fast. So we're probably anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 units short of where we should be to kind of maintain that balanced market. We'd have to increase permits by 40% overnight, which that's not going to happen, just to catch up to a more balanced market by 2028. Then, of course, we also had the same low rate mania that everyone else in the country experienced, the 2 to 3% mortgages, and then all of those people kind of moving here during that COVID era that just drove prices right through the roof from 2020 to 2022. And then with our geography and zoning, we have mountains to the west of us, Denver, and some green spaces to the north. It kind of keeps raw land a little bit limited and a little bit more pricey. And those water tap fees, let me tell you, you don't want to have to pay one of those out of pocket. So let's talk about what's happening right now. So here we are in the month of May. We've seen a huge inventory jump, almost 40% from the beginning of this year until now. So homes are lingering a little bit longer, finally, and we're seeing opportunities to get concessions, maybe some price reductions for the first time in, honestly, a few years. But the other problem is that we're feeling this affordability squeeze with rates of anywhere from 6.5 to 7.2 I've even seen this year. So all of our buyer clients are really feeling that squeeze. For the first time in a decade, though, we've shifted to kind of a soft buyer's market. So there's still opportunity out there, but there's going to be some caveats with that opportunity. So let's talk about some headwinds and tailwinds items looking, a couple of years into the future. Rates are likely to stay pretty high through 2026. And honestly, I'm just not holding my breath for rates to make any sort of move anymore. They're probably going to stay above 6% until we get into 2026. However, our population is projected to add another 8 to 10K residents per year. So that's going to create long-term demand. Wage growth is seriously lagging here. Colorado Springs just fell from the number 3 best place to live to number 406 overnight, according to U.S. News. The inventory deficit isn't going away anytime soon, however. Builders can't just add 30 or 40,000 units overnight. So this rate lock situation that we have going on, that is really going to keep a lot of sellers locked in a little bit, right? People are a little more apprehensive to give up their 2 and 3% interest rates and move up just to trade into a 7% interest rate. Also, if you're not tracking, the Secretary of Defense just put out a proposal, not approved yet, but this could have a huge impact to kind of switch up the PCS cycles. So we see a lot of military folks moving every 2 to 3 years. That cycle could grow longer, anchoring more high-skill jobs to this area. Now comes the real question. Should you buy here? Well, if you're going to be keeping that high-skill, high-paying job where you're moving from and working remotely, and you plan on staying more than 5 years, it is a strong yes, absolutely, no questions asked. You should be considering buying here. However, if you're moving here and you're relying on a new local salary, you really want to dig into your finances and run and crunch some numbers with a trusted lender. Otherwise, house poor risk is real. We'll jump into what some of those numbers look like for local salaries here a little bit later in the video. If you're unsure about your timeline or you're waiting for the crash, I wouldn't count on that. All the data points point to sideways pricing or flatter pricing, not the 2010 style, just through the floor price drops. So don't necessarily count on that one. If you're an investor seeking an appreciation sprint right now, well, the data also doesn't point to that. The returns actually look a little bit muted. Your best bet would be to focus on a cash flow play or maybe get into the short-term rental niche. Just to mention your renting option super briefly, because everybody always compares renting versus buying. It's always a huge piece of the conversation. The median rent here in Colorado Springs as of May of 2025 is right around $2,400. Now, housing, this is usually the biggest cost in your move and the biggest consideration in your move, but it's not the full story.
Now, typically the first thing that people are looking at when they're moving somewhere is the cost of housing. Where am I going to live? But what's actually bringing people here is their jobs. And you'll see it in Reddit forums, you'll see it in our comment section, and you'll hear it at the coffee shop. The number one complaint that people have is that the cost of living is outpacing salary growth. So let's just take a quick peek at some data just so that you can see kind of how things are changing and how it's affecting the Colorado Springs feel, because it's really causing a lot of people to consider leaving. And we got to figure out if the job that you're accepting when you're coming here is going to be right for you, and if you're going to be able to afford the lifestyle that you and your family want. So first and foremost, our median household income. In Colorado Springs, it is about $83,200. That's according to 2023. And the national is about $75,000. So we've got a strong earning baseline that's above the national average. Now, April 2025 unemployment is at 4.6 for Colorado Springs. That's a little bit higher than our national average of 3.9%. It is a little bit tighter market than California, but it is overall softer than the national average. Now, like Sam said earlier, our median sales price is about $490,000, which is not that surprising because we are on the front range of the Rocky Mountains. However, the national average is about $420,000, and you're going to see this starts to increase the tension between the price to income ratio. Comfortably, we want to be around 2 to 3x our price to income ratio. But here in Colorado Springs, we're at 5.7x. That is really, really painful. And it's a legitimate concern that a lot of people have about whether they're going to be able to stay here long term. Now, the national average is 4x. That's uncomfortable for anyone, no matter where you're living. But definitely you can understand how at 5.7x, your dollars just don't go as far. So what are the main sources of income in Colorado Springs? We've got 3 main pillars, starting with aerospace and defense. This is no surprise. We have 5 military bases here and a large military population that ends up staying here because they don't want to go back to the middle of nowhere. We've got Lockheed, we've got Oracle, Northrop Grumman, L3, Boeing. There's so many in the defense sector. So a lot of people get out of the military and they transition right over to those. And a lot of those jobs, they're paying comfortable salaries, $110,000 to $150,000. But those are pretty skilled, pretty niche jobs. And if I were to put my tin hat on, which I won't for this, I don't feel like those jobs are going anywhere in the near future. So the second main pillar of income here in Colorado Springs is cybersecurity and IT, which a lot of it is remote work. You've got a lot of people that left Denver, the Bay Area, LA, San Diego, and they moved from very expensive cities out to Colorado Springs where they could continue to do that remote work. Now, some of the main players out here, you've got like BombBomb, FormStack. There's also some microchip development going on out here. And like we said, cybersecurity mixed with pillar number one, which is defense. There's just a lot of opportunity for those types of jobs out here. The median salary around those is about $120,000, so comfortably within that range for Colorado Springs. Now, good news for the family is that the third major pillar is actually the healthcare industry. It might come as a surprise, but across Colorado Springs, we have a lot of healthcare professionals. There's a lot of major hospitals and a lot of really good healthcare that's here. You don't have to go to Denver for everything. The major players in the healthcare space are UC Health, Common Spirit, which used to be Penrose St. Francis. And then you also have some satellite children's hospital networks here as well. So again, you don't have to go up to Denver unless it's like hyper specialized care. We have a lot of that opportunity right here in Colorado Springs. And as everybody knows, those are pretty good paying jobs. It's either going to be high five figures or easily into the six-figure income range. So how much do you actually need to live here? Not just considering your house, but to live comfortably. Well, there was just a recent study done, and this number might surprise you. For a single person moving to Colorado Springs to live comfortably, $106,000 a year. That sounds actually pretty crazy. Now, that $106,000, what they're considering is that 50% goes towards necessities, 30% goes towards discretionary spending, and 20% goes towards savings or debt repayment. And still, that is a pretty significant number. And now for a family of four, that number is $273,000. That's a struggle if you're not in one of those three major industries. And you see, that's really painful because home values have risen 48% in the last 5 years, and wages have only risen 18%. That's how we start to get a larger delta in the price to income ratio. Even Milliken's 2025 best performing cities has Colorado Springs at number 5 for job and wage growth. That's amazing. But when you stack it up against the cost of living here in Colorado Springs, it really puts a damper, and it's something that just has this black cloud over the entire experience.
Before we jump into city comparisons, we wanted to give you an idea of what it feels like in our daily lives here, what it costs to live here on the day-to-day.
Electric, gas, water, trash. I like that.
Yeah.
Groceries, transportation, all that type of stuff. And we're just going to hit them pretty quick because we could truly make an entire video on each one of these things. But let's start off with like just the major utilities. What do your utilities look like on a monthly basis?
Yes. So I pulled up my bills here, and this includes electric, gas, water, wastewater, other charges, whatever that means. So June of this year, right? I am currently sitting at $177. So,
and I think that's pretty normal.
It's pretty normal, right? We're a family of two. We live in a house that's roughly 1,700 square feet or so, brick house. So pretty average cost, right? Where you're going to notice the difference is in the shoulder seasons, the switch in the shoulder seasons, right? Because even getting into like December charges, it's $198. So nothing crazy, right? Not a huge shift. But as we get into March and February, that's where the big jump takes place. It was $233. And the big kicker was my gas bill.
And I find that really interesting because a lot of people ask this question. It's like the number one, it's like, what are my utilities going to look like? And, you know, again, it depends on where you're coming from. But if you're coming from California, you can definitely expect to have much lower utility bills overall. Note about trash. Trash is a little bit unique out here, as in you've got options. You can actually do a little bit of digging. The reality is that they pretty much all kind of come in really close. If you read up on the Reddit forum, some people have really strong opinions one way or the other. Yep. Both Sam and I currently use SoCo Waste just because it's a local company.
Yep.
But SoCo Waste Management,
Springs Waste,
they're all relatively like within 10 or 15%. Yep. Most people, what they do is it's very common that they'll have a 95-gallon one for trash and then another 95-gallon one for recycling. Where I live, if you live over on the west side, it's very common and highly recommended that you have a bear can. So it's a little bit more expensive. But you're talking like, we're just going to ballpark this, about $120 to $130 a quarter. So not that much.
Yeah, 30-40 bucks every single month, right? Let's talk about internet costs. So I go through Underline, a little bit more of a local company here in the Springs. To get fiber service, I get 1 gig and I pay $65 a month. What I like about them and prefer about them over the big companies, they actually have several service providers under their umbrella. So I pay a little bit more than what you could kind of expect to pay, but expect anywhere from 50 to 65, 70 bucks a month.
Yeah, and Quantum Fiber is who I use. It just happens to be where I'm at. Same thing. I'm getting like 2 up, 2 down. 2 gigs up and 2 gigs down. And I'm paying about $50 a month. And you can actually increase that to be some wild numbers. Fiber is largely available in Colorado Springs, but it's continuing to expand. It is not everywhere. So when we were living on the east side of town, we were using Xfinity for a while. Same thing. We were still paying about $75 a month, just getting much slower speeds.
So let's real quick talk about groceries, gas, daily spending. Right. So I just kind of pulled some quick averages here in the city because it's going to be a little bit different for everyone on kind of how that looks. For my wife and I, family of 2, small dog, we probably spend right around $600 a month or so on groceries. And we eat relatively healthy.
Do you guys eat out a lot?
We don't eat out a ton. Probably a couple of times a week max.
Yeah.
And that's kind of included in our $600 a month.
So talking groceries, you definitely have options here, but the main places that people eat are like Safeway. Well, get groceries, and they don't eat at Safeway. I guess you could, but the main places that people get groceries, Safeway is probably the biggest, but King Soopers is the other major one. So if you're looking at where am I going to live, I'm the type of person, I don't know what you are, I'm the type of person that I like living near a grocery store because I'm going to go there probably 4 times a week. Unlike some people that go to the grocery once every 2 weeks and they get like just everything that they need for a while. But then of course we have Sprouts here. There's quite a few of those. You've got your Trader Joe's and you've got Whole Foods. And then of course you have 2 Costco's in town. I don't know how many Sam's Clubs there are because I am a Costco girly. So
2 of those as well.
2 Sam's Clubs.
Yes. So I would say I was pulling some numbers again. Sorry to cut you off a little bit, but right around 3% higher than the national average is kind of what I was finding. You can still expect to pay $3 or $4 for a gallon of regular milk, $3 or $4 for for a dozen regular eggs. As you get into, I looked it up. As you get into the more organic stuff, that's where you start seeing the higher prices. So my wife and I, we like the Vital Farms eggs. That's $9 a dozen, right? So you start climbing up depending on how it is that you eat.
I just get my eggs at Costco because they're way cheaper at Costco. So groceries, it's always a hard thing to compare, but the reality is that for both groceries and gas is that because we're such a landlocked in the middle of the country type of place, the shipping cost just to get here, everything is a little bit more cost prohibitive. So if you're coming from Texas, you'll definitely notice, obviously, that gas prices are going to be a little bit more. Both of us drive diesel trucks, and diesel has consistently been in the low 3s for a couple of years now. And then gas prices have consistently been in the high 2s. And that's pretty consistent across Colorado, unless you get into like some of the smaller mountain towns. But it affects your groceries. It affects our gas prices just because things have to be all shipped here.
Now, talking about childcare and kind of family costs, I feel like that's just expensive everywhere these days. But kind of doing some research, some anecdotal research, and the online forums and all those sorts of things, it looks like the cost for daycare for one child or infant care could be anywhere from like $1,800 to $2,400 a month.
I think that's why, if you guys remember earlier, we were talking about how much does it cost to live comfortably in Colorado Springs? And for like a single person, it was one number. But when you're talking about a family of 4, going all the way up to $273,000. And I think that's one of the main reasons is because when you start to factor in childcare, that gets, it's just expensive. It gets really, really tough. Now, I will say, though, that there are a lot of like the homeschooling community here is pretty strong. There are a lot of little networks. I would say we're very community-based. I feel like a very community-based community, city. And so, through the Facebook groups and things like that, there are alternatives to just like a full-on professional daycare, but that'll just be based off of where you live and your own personal comfort level.
Yep, absolutely. So jumping real quick into transportation, this is just a reality. We are not a city where public transport can always be relied on necessarily.
I don't think really ever.
Yeah, I personally have never really taken the bus here around the city. We don't have like a train system like the RTD up in Denver, the railway system up there. That's supposedly coming at some point in the future, but I'm not holding my breath for it because they've been talking about it for 20 years. So you will need a car here, and you'll need to factor that into your cost of living. You just got to drive here, and you might be able to very likely set it up where your commute could be a shorter commute. But let's say you live in Falcon, that might be a 40-minute drive both ways every single day. The maintenance starts to stack up on the car. The gas cost starts to stack up on the car. So it's something you definitely have to consider.
Yeah. And unfortunately, even I think if you look at Colorado Springs as a whole, our walkability score is not super high. There are some neighborhoods that have moderate walkability, and I'm going to include bikeability. There's a lot of bike trails here. I mean, endless bike trails here, but it's not that common because we have so much suburban sprawl. Like, I don't know anybody that doesn't have a car. Pretty much it's the only way to get around. And then the other thing that I'll add on top of that for the younger generation is like Ubers. Ubers are not super prevalent here. Uber and Lyft, there's very few. And so when you look at like a supply and demand, it really drives the price up.
Yeah.
It is very common to have $30 Ubers.
Yeah.
Just because there's not that many, there's not a lot that are available. So as far as transportation is concerned, it's like you're pretty much looking at, you got to have a vehicle, downtown parking, pretty much everywhere you have to pay for, although it's very inexpensive.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it a lot, I mean, we're talking, $2, $3, $4 at most.
Yeah.
But as you do that a lot, that can really start to stack up as well.
Absolutely. So let's jump into really quick some of the hidden cost and overlooked kind of realities of living here, because I think some of the costs do catch people off guard. Not an absolute necessity here, but it does absolutely help, is snow tires.
Yeah.
And some of the seasonal gear that
I would say snow tires or an all-wheel driver for you.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Because I've never bought straight up snow tires personally.
Yeah.
But I've lived in Utah. Like, I've lived in snowy climates before, so I'm a little bit used to it. But like, definitely both of our vehicles are either four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive.
Yeah. And a big part of the reason you're moving here is to enjoy the outdoors and get away from the city a little bit, right? And so having that all-wheel drive vehicle, a vehicle that's a little bit more capable, is going to help you enjoy that lifestyle a little bit more. Another one that people may not necessarily think of right off the bat, your state park fees, any of your national park fees, trailhead parking, some of those sorts of costs will start to stack up throughout the year. So we didn't do it this year, but we try to buy a state park pass every single year. We did do it. I bought it through my license plate fee. Yeah, with the new vehicle. So that's another cost that can stack up on people.
And speaking of vehicles, two things that are just going to really grind your gears.
Yeah.
Number one is the cost of registration.
Yes.
The vehicle registration is absurd. I was talking to somebody this morning who was like, I think it was in Florida or somewhere in the South. They were like, we pay like $15 a year. Here, when you buy and register a new vehicle, you're looking at $1,000, give or take.
At least.
Yeah. It is outrageous how expensive it is. And then number two is insurance. So insurance for your vehicle. I moved up here from New Mexico. It is very common that a lot of people, they move here and their insurance doubles.
Yep.
My truck, it's straight doubled.
Yep, absolutely. We have only ever been in one wreck since we started driving. but we noticed our premiums went up. It was probably right after 2017. We had a few big hailstorms roll through and just caused a ton of damage. So premiums for the vehicles and also premiums for like wind and hail on your homeowner's insurance. You'll absolutely notice a difference there too. Now, property taxes are going to be a little bit lower, which helps offset that cost.
It does, but it's still frustrating. And we do have, I believe, the number 6 lowest property taxes in the country, which is super awesome. So for perspective, on like a $650,000 house, now this depends on what zip code you live in Colorado Springs or whereabouts you live. But for a $650,000 house, you can estimate about $2,200 to $2,400 annually, which is amazing.
Yeah.
My parents live in Illinois, and with a $200,000 house, they're paying about $6,000 annually. So our property taxes are definitely super low, but it's made up for in kind of the registration, which, is arguable as a use tax. I don't know if I necessarily buy that. Something of note, though, I mentioned this earlier for disabled veterans, is that if you are 100% disabled veteran, you can actually get the DV license plate, and it will cover one vehicle registration, and that license plate just sticks with you. So if you register your vehicle, let's say that you have a truck, and then you buy a new truck, you actually keep that same license plate, and it just transfers to your new vehicle, and it is now registered. So that's super nice.
And you actually have an incentive as well as a disabled veteran on your property taxes. Is that correct?
Yep. And we talked about that a little bit earlier, but it's so minimal. It basically reduces $100,000 off of your assessed value, which once you start getting kind of over the median, it's like it's not that significant.
Yeah. Another property tax incentive, if you will, just of note, is the senior tax incentive. So you do have to be 65 or older, live here for more than 10 years, but it is going to reduce the taxable amount of the first $200,000 of your property by up to 50%. So that's another one of note real quick.
Okay, now what you've all been waiting for, where are you coming from to Colorado Springs, and how far does my dollar go? Well, of course, we had to turn to trusty dusty Forbes.com. They have a cost of living in Colorado Springs calculator. So you can throw in here your pre-tax household income, my starting city, and I want to live in. And of course, we're going to start with San Diego. So we're using $200,000, and we're just considering a small family moving from San Diego coming to Colorado Springs. So obviously, you can do this with your pre-tax income in whatever city that you're coming from. But I think this is a really good baseline just for planning, because again, we don't want you guys coming here and coping with financial changes by avoiding them. We want you to face these head on. So let's start with good old San Diego, California. If you make $200,000 in San Diego, to be able to afford the same lifestyle here, you only need to make $140,000. That is 43% lower in Colorado Springs. That's a significant difference. And I can tell you from friends that I have and clients that I've had that have moved up here, they have really experienced this, that as they move up to Colorado Springs, they're like, oh my God, everything's so cheap. When sometimes, I came from the Midwest and like the middle of nowhere, New Mexico, and I feel it a little bit differently. So a couple things. So transportation costs, 32% lower in Colorado Springs. That's no surprise. Anytime that gas prices start to get wild, people start showing pictures of California. You start seeing like the wild gas prices. But I think this big one right here is that homes tend to cost 48% lower. And I just want to scroll down here and look at it. Your general home price, $1.1 million down in San Diego to get something that's $557,000 here. Now, this makes Colorado Springs look really amazing, but if you look at something like Texas and you see a home that pops up $400,000 in Texas, you're going to see like a mansion, brand new, but it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. So you're definitely going to have a much better quality of life. And if you continue to make $200,000 here, because you just have remote work and you're able to move to Colorado Springs, your dollars are going to go so much further. You're going to experience a way better quality of life.
So let's compare a few more. I also want to look at San Francisco. So same parameters, $200,000 household income. if you're moving from the Bay Area to Colorado Springs to maintain your standard of living, $123,000. Overall cost of living, 62% lower. I've had some clients move from that area. I think they sold a townhome outside of San Francisco, 1,400 square feet, not a great neighborhood, according to them. 625 G's, which again, housing is where you're going to see that biggest savings, 58% lower here in Colorado Springs. Very similar on the transportation cost, 33% lower. And surprisingly, utilities, 52% lower on the utilities. So just for kicks and gigs, looking at a home price in San Francisco versus Colorado Springs, kind of similar, almost $1.4 million, equivalent to $557,000 here in Colorado Springs. That is wild to me. But as we mentioned earlier in the video, we don't want to give you guys the idea that it's crazy cheap or crazy expensive here. It all depends on where you're coming from.
Now, most people are actually not moving from Salt Lake City to the Colorado Springs area, but a lot of people are considering when they want to move to the Mountain West, do I want to live in Denver, Colorado Springs, or do I want to live in Salt Lake City and kind of the Utah Valley out there? So I think this is a very relevant comparison here for, again, if you're moving from one of those other cities, is it going to be more expensive or less expensive to come to the Colorado Springs area? So looking at Salt Lake City, if you're making $200,000, the equivalent, you would only need to make $188,000. So really, I think that's pretty dang close. There's not a major difference there. Homes tend to cost 13% lower. That is significant because when you're talking about a $600,000 home, you're talking about almost $70,000 in difference in the same home that you get. So that is definitely worth considering. It's 6% lower in Colorado Springs than it is over there. And utilities are 19% lower in Colorado Springs than over in Salt Lake City. Also not surprising. I lived in the Salt Lake City area for quite a few years. That is actually what introduced me to the Mountain West. And I really do love it out there. In fact, I have a whole video comparing Provo to Colorado Springs because they're both kind of the B cities to Salt Lake and Denver. And they're very similar. Like, you move to those areas for very, very similar reasons. You want the outdoor lifestyle. You want to be one with nature. You want to be able to get into the mountains, but they definitely have very, very different vibes. But as far as the dollars are concerned, you're getting pretty dang close. Yeah. I find this one very interesting, though, just to see the math work out for a home price in Salt Lake City, $712,000 will get you that $557,000 home here. So that is really, really powerful when you're talking about the affordability. And I wouldn't, so like I said, it's a totally different debate. If you're looking to move to the Mountain West and you're trying to figure out where to live, your dollars are going to go further here in Colorado Springs. Let's do St. Louis.
Yeah.
We need a Texas one before we go that far. Let's just do Dallas.
You literally we're like a second and a half ahead of me. I was going to be like, oh, no, maybe Dallas.
We'll do Dallas. We'll do St. Louis. And then maybe one more.
Something in Florida.
Yeah. Like Jacksonville. Something with the tape.
Now, this one is really interesting to me. We've talked about cities that so far are generally more expensive than Colorado Springs. And it's kind of been, the difference maker has kind of been in housing prices, right? So let's look at another one here, Dallas, Texas. You actually need a smidgen more money to live and maintain the same lifestyle here in Colorado Springs than you do in Dallas, Texas. What is the difference maker again? You guessed it, housing prices. Homes tend to cost 17% more. 17% more here in Colorado Springs than somewhere like Dallas, Texas. Now, why is that? Well, I think going back to what I was saying earlier, we're so short in building units. And one thing Texas is very good at is building homes, building them fast, and building a lot of them.
Yeah, and it's also location. Like,
yeah.
I think, when you look at Dallas, like, I think people I think people move to Dallas because there's a lot of job opportunity,
Yeah.
but not because they're thinking to themselves, Dallas seems like the coolest place on earth. I want to move there.
Sure. Yeah.
And it shows, like I said earlier too, when you scroll on Instagram and you see houses,
Yeah.
you're just like, oh my God. So I guess that 17%, I didn't realize it was that.
So here's some really good numbers to paint that picture. In Dallas, Texas, you can get the Colorado Springs $557,000 house, right, for $476,000.
I buy that.
That's a big difference right there. Big difference, right? Transportation, healthcare, not really anything of note. Again, just kind of all stuck in the housing price there.
We've only got a couple more for you here, but this one hits near and dear to my heart because this is where I'm from. I am from St. Louis originally. That's where my family is. And I've also had plenty of clients come from the Midwest, and I think St. Louis is a very good representation of just a Midwest city that people come from. And you can see here, this number does not look that shocking, I don't think. I mean, we kind of know Colorado is going to be more expensive than the Midwest. So if you make $200,000 here or there, you would need to make $229,000 to have kind of the same lifestyle. However, the shocking news is that homes tend to cost 42% higher.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to give you a quick little gentle, loving anecdote. Is I remember my first clients that were moving out here from the Midwest. They were brand new to the $1 Million Club. It was like the first time they were approved up to kind of like 1.1, 1.2, and they kind of just wanted to buy a house right at $1 million. It felt like this really big deal. And we go out and we're looking for homes, and I remember them constantly saying, well, for $1 million, we should get X, Y, and Z. And A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? And
they're not necessarily wrong.
They're not necessarily wrong. But I kept having to say to them, I can get you that, but we have to go to Pueblo. Or I can get you that, but we have to go somewhere else. Like, if you want to buy $1 million home here, they're not pieces of junk. They're not crappy houses. They're still really, really nice houses. But I think that the reality is that a lot of homes in Colorado Springs, in my opinion, really were not built to be $1 million homes.
No.
That's a broad brushstroke. You know, in the Broadmoor they were, in Peregrine they were, in Glen Eagle they were. But like overall, you have a lot of houses that just appreciated there because we talked about how much it's grown in the last 5 to 10 years. And so there was some real sticker shock and expectation management that just wasn't met.
Yeah.
And while this number doesn't look that shocking, it's like, oh, it's a $29,000 difference. That's, maybe a pay raise. But when you talk about just the cost of a house being 42% higher, it really sets the expectation that when you leave some of those places in the Midwest and you're looking at $1 million there, and then you come out here and you're tucked up under the mountains, your $1 million just does not go nearly as far.
Now, for our final city, let's go all the way to the East Coast and kind of compare Tampa, Florida. I'm a little bit surprised at this because Florida has things that we don't have, namely a beach and bugs
and humidity
and
no mountains
well, I said they have things we don't have, but I'm a little bit surprised by this just because like Florida is another really desirable place for people to live. And again, here, generally speaking, it's a little bit more expensive to live in Colorado Springs than it is in Tampa. Let's see. And again, there it is. Homes tend to be more expensive, 17% higher. Is your housing cost. So what you can buy here for $557 is what you can get in Florida, in Tampa, Florida, for $451. That is really surprising. I think the more I delve into this, the more it does kind of remind me like when California went through their big boom, you had a lot of homes that weren't built to be the price that they ended up being. And that is like kind of the spot that we're sitting in at the moment.
Yeah. And so it really begs this question of like how much bang for your buck, like where can I get the most bang for my buck? And we have a whole video on that where we kind of like delve into the different areas of Colorado Springs. And we're really just looking at data. It's a little bit anecdotal, but it is just straight. What does $500,000 get me on the west side of town versus all the way in the Northeast in like Peyton? And like Sam has been mentioning multiple times, the inventory is just not there. We're not building fast enough, but also there's only so much room because yes, we can continue building east and we're going to. It's going to continue developing to the north and the east, but where people are moving to Colorado Springs, it's like they're really trying to get towards the mountains.
Yeah.
They don't really want to live in Kansas. That's why they're moving to Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And so it makes that even as you build out to the east, your supply and demand, the demand is always higher over on the west side of town because it's just in the mountains or it's near more open space. And it kind of has that Colorado feel. So it just gives a little bit more of a price discrepancy and kind of I'll say a quality discrepancy as well. There's just nowhere else to build over on the west side of town.
So if you're coming from California, Colorado Springs might feel like wide open freedom. But if you're coming from somewhere like Kansas, it might feel really expensive. And that's the point. Cost of living is really personal.
And so now that we've talked about everything cost of living in Colorado Springs, now the real question is, where do I live? Where do you bring your family and what's the best neighborhood for you? So make sure to subscribe because our next video, we're going to go in depth on all the best neighborhoods in Colorado Springs so that you can figure out what's right for you. Our contact information is down below if you're ready to get started today.